And hello, I'm Jennifer Kim from the Young Women's Breast Cancer Awareness Foundation, and welcome to the call tonight. And we have Abby Ziegler, who is the Family and Youth Program Manager from our clubhouse with us tonight. And I am excited to have her on. This is the first time she's been on one of our calls or in any of our meetings. But she just came off of a week of kids camp last week, and we were talking a little bit about it. They have amazing programs at our clubhouse, so she can tell you a little bit about her experience and about what they offer down there, and we can ask questions, and she has a presentation available for us. So I'm going to put her in the spotlight, and then I'm going to mute myself.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here tonight. I feel really grateful to be here. Like Jen said, this is my first time joining your group, so I'm thankful to be here and have the opportunity to talk with you all tonight. Like Jen said, my name's Abby. I'm the Family and Youth Program Manager at our clubhouse in Pittsburgh, and it's good to see some familiar faces on here too. And for those of you I haven't met yet, I'm looking forward to meeting you and talking with you. But for those of you who aren't familiar with our clubhouse, it's a nonprofit organization, and we offer support programs for anyone touched or impacted by cancer. So either those diagnosed as well as the family and friends in their network of support. So I focus on the youth programs for families, children, and teens, offering support opportunities and connection opportunities through programs we offer. We are completely virtual now, which we've kind of immersed ourselves into this new world, which is neat because we really can go anywhere now. So we have transferred most of our programs to a virtual format like you have with your group here tonight. And so I will tell you a little bit about those programs kind of as we talk and continue through the night. But I do have some slides prepared. I know tonight our focus is on parenting through cancer, especially during times of uncertainty like the time we're in now. So I have some information to share with you and some resources. So we'll go through that for a little bit, but I want to spend most of our time discussing and talking together so that I can answer any questions that you might have, and we can hear from everyone on the call too, as far as questions and things that other families have done and tried. So I will start us off here with some slides. And just to tell you a little bit about my background, I have a background in child life and child development. And typically you will find us in the pediatric hospital setting. However, there are a few of us within the community setting, and our whole goal and background is using development and play to try to promote typical development when there's medical stressors, when there's a trauma, when there's a negative life event or circumstance. It could be anything from a cancer diagnosis to a natural disaster, anything that might rock a child's development, to try to use play interventions to keep them on track. So that is what I focus on with my interventions at our clubhouse and when I work with families as well. So I'll share a little bit of information here. We definitely will have time for questions at the end, but also if you have, I think everyone has the chat feature on their Zoom screen. So that's another way we can keep track of them as well. But if there's anything pressing, you can certainly interrupt me. I want this to be more of a conversation. And I'm happy to talk and answer any questions that come up while I'm sharing these slides. So like I said, tonight we're going to talk about parenting while living with cancer, which is already brings enough uncertainty and unknowns, but during a time where we have this virus on top of us that's bringing much more to the table as far as uncertainty goes, makes it even more difficult. So we're going to kind of weave that in throughout. But I will start talking about why it's important to talk about cancer with your kids and teens. Why are we talking about it tonight? Developmental considerations in the framework of language. So specific examples of helpful language to use with kids, reactions you might see from your kids, signs of stress. Then we're going to go through some quick tools and strategies that I use at the clubhouse that you can use in any environment. Explaining and preparing for change. This can be related to diagnosis or, again, the time we're in now. Lots of kids are either getting ready to transition back to school or transition to a homeschool setting and how that's going to look. Keeping the conversation going and open, and then I'll tell you at the end a little bit more about our programs and what we do at the clubhouse. So Fred Rogers, I think, explains this perfectly, why we talk about cancer, why we talk about any hard, challenging thing. And he said, anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that's mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone. So that's exactly kind of the framework in which we have conversations about cancer with kids. If we talk about it, it becomes less scary. We get the information we need, and that helps us cope with it. So cancer isn't a dirty word. When we use it with kids, we tell them that it's okay to talk about hard things. So we're setting that openness with them. We show them that emotion is okay. A lot of times as adults, I think we try to hide hard feelings with risk of upsetting kids, but showing them is showing them that it's okay to have those feelings, and you're modeling that. Talking builds trust and safety in the relationship, so kids are going to understand from the adults around them that they're safe and that they'll know the information that's going to impact them. It builds resiliency for the child and the family. It's a great way to figure out any misconceptions that the child has about cancer or anything that's going on or changing in the family, and promotes positive ways to cope. So oftentimes cancer conversations turn into what families can do together, schedule changes, ways they can cope, different family activities to kind of cope and process through. So it also starts that conversation. So the importance of language, where to start with kids. It is important to use the word cancer, and we often will suggest this because it's important for kids to distinguish between illness due to cancer and illness due to typical sickness that everyone gets once in a while. So if we pick up a germ here or there and get a cold, that's very different than having cancer. So cancer can be scary, cancer can be intense, and it can look very different than picking up a germ and getting a cold. So it's important to distinguish that for kids. And then also, a lot of times kids don't have a prior connection to the word cancer like adults do. So it's often less scary for kids to hear that word than adults to hear that word. With that being said, whatever the family decides is what's best for that family. So there are people who choose not to use that word, and that's okay too. And what works for one family might not work for another. So that's typically what we kind of recommend and guide, but there's certainly reasons why you might use different words as well. So avoiding words that have double meaning, including any religious and faith-based beliefs into the conversation, and then focusing on development is important when considering the language and the amount of information you're providing to kids. We generally say that you give more information with older developmental levels, but it's also important for those older developmental levels, for older school-age kids and for teens, to be asking them what kind of information they'd like and what form they'd like it in. So some teens will say that they just want to know like the summary points, and other teens will say they want to know all of the details. And that just depends on how that child copes and uses that information to process. So that's always an open conversation that you can have with your kids. And here's just some fun examples of words that have dual meanings that us adults don't always recognize, but the child brain is a really special thing. So just to keep in mind. And so I'll get into a little bit of development. I know that there are kids spanning across different ages here, and so we'll touch on a couple different points, and I'll highlight some things, but I'm also going to send this information to Jen, who can provide this, so you'll have this to refer to. So I might not go over every single word in these next several slides, but I want to start by saying, as we all know, children are much more likely to show feelings based off of mood changes and behavior changes, and how they're treating adults and friends and family members versus the words that they're using. So if they're showing irritability, if they're showing temper, if they're showing extra clinginess, these are all signs that they're adjusting, that they're reading emotions around them, that they're processing. And the reactions we're going to go through, these aren't necessarily bad things or abnormal things. They're actually very normal and to a certain extent. So it becomes maybe more of a problem or concern if they persist and the child can't feel like they can regulate back to a comfortable place. But these things that we see are definitely very normal, and there are things that you can do at home to kind of help the child process through and regulate. So infants and toddlers, of course, they don't have a concept really of illness, what it is. They understand the words like boo-boo, and you'll see older toddlers starting to get fascinated with Band-Aids and putting them on places they don't have cuts or scrapes, but if they're starting to kind of navigate that and understand the body, how it works. So the biggest thing with infants and toddlers is routine changes and how that impacts them. And they often, they'll react based off of the stress that the caregiver is under. So they respond to emotions, they can read emotions around them. They might show separation anxiety, irritability. So it's super important for this age group to provide consistent routines when possible and consistent caregivers when possible as well. And so I do have, after different developmental levels, some language suggestions, but some of them are wordy, so I'll save them for your reading. But I do have specific language suggestions in here for anyone who would like to read through. And for preschool, the biggest thing with preschoolers is they're very egocentric. So they're concerned about what's impacting their world around them. Very imaginative. So you'll see a lot of misconceptions and questions come up with this age group. And a lot of times it's just repeating the same information over and over and over again to allow them time to process and understand it. They might develop fears based off the misconceptions of illness. And a lot of our favorite Disney movies kind of play into these fears of what illness looks like, what death looks like, and kind of how the body works. We have Frozen, where people come back to life. We have Sleeping Beauty. We have lots of Disney movies and themes that kids are seeing that play into how they start to understand illness. And short-term preparation works definitely the best for this age group because they're not able to understand time as well as older kids. So this is where you start to see a regression in development in preschoolers if they're under any sort of stress. So that could be sleeping in the bed with parents. If they're young preschool and they were potty trained, they might go back to not being potty trained for a bit. They have new fears, maybe aren't sleeping as well. So again, maintaining as much consistency as possible, and preparation is important for specifically how their world's going to change, or if anything physically is going to change around them as well. And then for school age, this is like the age of the learner. So kids they're starting to put together cause and effect. They love gathering information and learning about different topics. So you'll see they're able to understand more complex information about cancer. Around the age of 9, they start associating what happens to one person might happen to another person. So around this age, you might start to hear the questions, if you have cancer, does that mean I'll get cancer? Or does that mean my friend will get cancer, my teacher, someone else in the family? So that's something to keep an eye on. And they're especially prone to believe that they can catch cancer. So if it's something in the air, like a germ that you get, like a cold. So we've actually had kids tell me that cancer happens from an infected cut. I've heard cancer happens from a virus. Cancer happens, we all have tumors in our body, and people with cancer just happen to get cancer in one of their tumors. So this is all school age, coming from school age, like 2nd through 5th grade. And these weren't necessarily new diagnoses to the family. And it's not that the family didn't discuss it, but just over time, kids are imaginative and they make their own meaning of things. So it's good to, even if you've had the conversation with your kids, keep having that conversation, kind of check in when you're able, when it's appropriate, to see what their understanding is. And in this age group, you can see a wide range of emotional reactions. So this is where more of the complex emotions come into play. They might want to be extra good or an extra helper. It's important to be honest with this group. Avoid making any promises that we know if we're not certain we can keep. And then with this age group too, it's really important to encourage them and give them permission to play. Even if you're sick or not feeling well, that still means that you can have fun and play, and that's okay. And then if your child is transitioning back to school this fall, it's good to identify a main contact person there who can support that child, and one person you can maintain communication with. Here's a language example that we'll send out. And then for adolescents, this is when it's especially important, like I was saying before, to kind of have the conversation with them on what information they'd like to hear and at what points. That will help them build trust with you, with the communication, and will give them what they need to cope. A lot of teens, if they're not given the information, will figure it out on their own. And that's often different or more scary than what the reality is. So it's definitely good to be open and honest with this age group. They are working towards independence. You might see one reaction that's unique for this age group is kind of an apathy reaction, or a sense of they don't care, or they're not interested. From what I've heard from teens when I've worked with them and a parent's concerned about that, a lot of times it comes out that that teen is afraid to share the emotions they're feeling because they don't want the parent to feel upset by that. So that's something we found, that it's not necessarily that they don't care, but there's a protection of feelings going on that you'll see between the child and the parent. So definitely they thrive with the honesty, rules and expectations, and school age and adolescence is a big time for peer support, which unfortunately with the isolation we've had and the distancing we've had, that's a huge coping skill that these kids have that they might not have had too much of during this time. So that's been an extra stressor definitely for families, is that even adults too, our coping skills that we use, we might not have had access to the past several months while we go through this, and same for the kids. So it's good to kind of acknowledge that and tune into that with your kids and where they're at. So again, just some more language examples I threw in here. Very simple, explaining treatment. The main, of course, there's more types of treatment, but here are just some language examples for the main: surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, immunotherapy to use with kids. And then I do want to just briefly kind of get into some tools and strategies that we use at our clubhouse and that can help kids even in a home environment. So there's a lot of new research on multiple intelligences and how they play into a child's learning. So the different learning strategies that work best for the child. And there's also research that these strategies that work best for kids based off learning work best for kids for coping. So they kind of go hand in hand. So they've identified 8 different intelligence areas: visual, spatial. So these are the kids who really enjoy learning through photos and videos. So for these kids, showing them photographs of cancer cells versus normal cells, or there's some neat videos that I can certainly forward on, all very helpful for them. For linguistic, these are kids who love reading and writing, so journaling might be a good coping skill. Also learning and then being able to share with someone and teach someone else what they've learned. For linguistic, another thing we use are question or worry jars, where kids create a jar together with their family, and then you use that to draw or write different questions or worries you have, and pick a time as a family to discuss those. It's kind of a safe way for kids to get some of their questions out as they come up naturally, because a lot of times when you talk with kids, if it's not in the present moment, it might not come up. So that's kind of a good way to track that. For interpersonal, these kids might do well in support groups. They're big empathy kids, so they read emotions very well and might benefit from having a role in some sort of helper position or a care role. And then intrapersonal kids, these kids do really well with solo work. Journaling, meditation, and mindfulness often works really well. And then as we move on, the kinesthetic learners, that's all based off of movement, building. We use Legos a lot to physically build cancer and what it is and what it does. The musical and rhythmic learners learn a lot through rhythm. They use music to understand the world. The naturalistic learners, these kids benefit from, they're really good at categorizing. So for teens, we often do a brain dump list to just organize the different areas that they're stressed in, to kind of take it out of their mind and put it on paper to get that control. And then they are in touch with nature and are often animal lovers too, which can be very therapeutic. And the kids who understand through logic and through math, this can be hard with cancer because there are a lot of unknowns with it, and we don't always know why it happens or have all the information on it. So this can be hard to cope with for kids who want that logic and understanding. So straightforward information, as straightforward and logical as you can get, can be anxiety reducing for these kids. And okay. So I want to just share some different resources. And again, you can have access to these slides, but these are free apps that you can download on any smart device that work really well with kids, especially in this age of technology. The ones I want to highlight are this one up at the top, the Kids Guide to Cancer, that it says, "What is cancer in a balloon?" This is great for school-age kids. It has social stories in it, and it has step-by-step explaining what cancer is, how it's treated, and different social scenarios that can come up when you're in a family with someone who has cancer. So I'd recommend checking that one out. And then the Magic Tree, has anyone heard of that one? So this one's specific to breast cancer, and it's a really neat app that incorporates games and information all at the same time for kids. And you kind of have to do different challenges, and through that you learn about cancer and complete different tasks. So it's kind of a fun way to learn about it, and they also address some different coping skills in this game. And then the SUP app for teens is through Wonders and Worries, and that is more like a journaling app for teens, and it's a really neat, Wonders and Worries is a really neat organization, but they have some great resources for teens specifically, because a lot of things are geared towards preschool, school age, especially when it comes to apps and books. So whenever there's a great teen one, it can be great to share and just have an outlet. It's specifically made for them. So onto some book ideas, and most of these books I'm going to share you can find on YouTube as well. So there's often readings of them on YouTube, which is great, but these are some cancer-related books that I use often. One of them is American Cancer Society's book, Let My Colors Out. The rest of them you can find on Amazon. They're mostly geared towards school age. They can really be anywhere from preschool through school age. And the last book I listed here, My Parent Has Cancer and It Really Sucks, that is geared towards teens, if you couldn't tell by the language there. So those are all good suggestions on places to start. I love incorporating books and more of a bibliotherapy into when I meet with kids, just helping them connect to the stories and it helps them share their experience and also take away lessons from what the character did in the book to their own life. There's also a lot of great books for emotional expression. So these, again, are great because the child's going to assign whatever meaning is important to them to these books. So whatever is happening in their life that they're worrying about, or they're having different feelings or emotions about, they're automatically, naturally going to assign that meaning to the book and kind of take from them what they need at that moment. So great kind of general feelings books I'd recommend. Especially Hey Warrior. That one's probably my favorite out of all of these. And then The Day the Crayons Quit is awesome too, because it goes through pretty much every single emotion a child could be experiencing. And then books for separation and isolation. These are three of my favorite books. These work well for if there's a hospitalization, if there's a doctor's appointment, if your kid is going back to school, and is just concerned about being separated. The Kissing Hand, The Invisible String, and Maybe Tomorrow are all good books on separation and isolation, even if they're missing family members at this point, or friends that they're not able to see. Again, you can really assign whatever meaning you need to these books, whatever's going on at the present time. And then I just wanted to share too some of my favorite workbooks for kids. And these are all developmentally based. So the one in the bottom left, the Because Someone I Love Has Cancer, this is a great workbook for preschool and young school age. The Draw It Out is a great workbook for kids who are school age. And then When Someone Has a Very Serious Illness, that's a great book for later school age and early, kind of that early teens. And then Ink About It is great for adolescents. So if your child is one of those reading and writing learners, a workbook can be definitely a great tool for them. And they're all fun and very developmentally friendly. And just briefly to go over some activity ideas, I have a picture of the question jar here that I mentioned earlier. Medical play is always good, giving kids an outlet to explore some of the medical things that they've heard about or seen. The American Childhood Cancer Organization has this free medical play kit with this cat I have pictured here. And it comes with a whole medical play kit, and they can pretend like they are accessing the cat's port. They can put a mask on the cat. They can bandage the cat. So it's a really good way to let them process through some of the questions they might have, along with Gabe the chemo duck there. The other thing I'll mention is this feelings parking lot with all these cars here. So if your child is more visual and not as verbal at explaining emotions, which most kids are not, this is kind of a neat activity where you can create all different types of feelings in parking spaces and then have the child pull in their cars to whatever emotion that they're feeling. So that's a good one where the child literally doesn't even have to talk. They can just see, they can see the faces, they can see the words, and use cars. So, and then we also have the Ella doll, which is made through Barbie, but there's an organization that provides them for free as well. So if anyone's interested in that, she comes with different wigs. I can send more resources there. So just kind of wrapping up here, keeping the conversation going is important through this time. So being honest and preparing for changes is a huge thing to focus on. Focusing on what the child can do, what the family can do. Being constructive, identifying things that the child can control and that you can control in whatever circumstance, whether it be diagnosis related or virus related or both. And it's okay to say, I don't know. So kids are going to have questions that you don't know. Again, cancer related or virus related, and that is definitely okay. It's better to say I don't know than to think of an answer that we're not too sure about or confident in. So that's just kind of feeding into that honesty piece. So preparing for change, of course, situations we have not experienced or don't feel control over are the ones that create the most anxiety. So preparing for the change, especially through the senses with younger kids, since they learn about their world through what they can see and hear and smell and taste and touch, that's a great way to also prepare. Let the child lead and actively listen, reflect back what they say. Giving them a role is important so that they feel some control over the situation. And then naming and labeling your emotions, and for younger children, their emotions, and modeling emotional expression for older kids and teens can be helpful as well. And then creating a schedule and a routine as best as possible and focusing on what is certain at this point and what the plan is. So a great way to prepare is by practicing, whether that be through medical play, through diagnosis related, or if it is going back to school, if your child is being homeschooled for the first time and hasn't been on Zoom or any sort of technology platforms, having them hop on to some sort of virtual workshop or lesson, having them practice what it's like to sit down or to stand in front of a screen and try to use that as a learning tool can be good ways to practice that process. It's going to look different no matter what. If the child's going back to school or if they're staying home, it'll look different for everyone. So it's just a matter of practicing and learning what the differences are and how we can adapt to those changes. And it's always good to come up with a plan B too. So if plan A isn't panning out, what's plan B going to look like? And then as well as figuring out a plan if someone in your family does end up being diagnosed with COVID, what that's going to look like. Not to invoke any sort of fear, but just if that happens at any point for any reason, how is your family going to navigate that? And what is that going to look like for your specific circumstance right now? Are just things to think about as school starts up again, as treatment continues, as we kind of continue in this space. And lastly, I just want to briefly touch on ancillary losses. And these, we're all feeling them right now. These are losses that happen that are called living losses. So when you're diagnosed, there's loss that comes with that of normalcy. With COVID, there's losses that have come with that, not being able to see family, not being able to see friends, kids not being able to participate in their normal activities, not being able to go back to school in some cases. If they are going back to school, maybe it's not full time or it's going to look different. So these are often hard to cope with because they can be very unclear, whereas a lot of losses have a start and an end to them. These are sort of ambiguous, and a lot of times it's hard to identify. But what you see in kids and as adults too, you have these feelings of grief. You're grieving. These losses that you might not even recognize is grief. So it's important to kind of think when you're looking at your child's reactions to things, what parts of this might be grief related to the lack of what that child is used to and experiencing that's gone at this point. And there is a connection between grief and separation, which I wanted to highlight. You'll see even in young kids signs of grief through separation from caregiver or from friends. And so this is a big one here too. As kids go back to school, if they're leaving family at home, you might see some grief reactions there. Or if they're not going back to school and their friends are going back to school and they're separated, you might see some grief reactions there too. So again, focusing on realistic expectations, what you can control, and staying in the present is easier said than done. I know you've probably seen this stuff 100 times at this point, and it's hard to stay in the present when some of these really hard things are happening in the present. Normally we say that the past and the future are where kind of anxiety lives based off of what happened and what could happen. But in our case right now, especially with this virus, a lot of the uncertainties are happening now. So the present might be an uncomfortable place to sit. So it can be helpful in that respect to think ahead and to plan and to get as much control, feelings of control as possible for what might come. So here's just kind of a listing. I put my contact information at the end here. I do meet with families and kids one-on-one virtually right now. through, I call it Child Life. And I certainly have books and resources and play-based activities that are possible to do over a screen. And so I have been doing that through this time, and will continue to be doing this as we move forward in the virtual space. And we also have youth workshops 3 times a week that are half an hour long for kids. So maybe if your child is doing virtual school and hasn't experienced kind of setting with other kids thus far, you can always pop into one of our workshops. We do lots of crafts, we do mindfulness exercises, we have adult workshops through this time as well, support groups. There's one specifically we have for kids who have an adult diagnosed with cancer called Climb, which we have not done virtually at this point, but will do if we have the interest for it and the families. But that's a social emotional learning group for kids ages 6 to 11, and many more resources on our Clubhouse website, which I listed. So I will open it up now. And like I said, I will give everyone access to these slides so they'll have these resources. But I'll open it up now to any questions or discussion that anyone would like to bring to the table.
Well, Abby, I just want to say that was excellent. I haven't had that experience of seeing you present before, and that's fabulous. I mean, you gave us some tools, some ways to identify behavior, what to look for, coping tools, books and websites and apps, and it was just amazing. That's fantastic. After trying to help women for 20 years, I had no idea that much stuff was out there and was available. So I truly appreciate it. And I agree with you, Angela. I think Angela put in the comments that she felt this was excellent as well. And she wished she would have had this a year and a half ago. But I will open it up to questions now. If you just want to, I think there's a small enough group that if you just want to unmute yourself, I know 2 people have their cameras off, so you can't necessarily see if so. How about we raise our hands? And if you have a question in the, Alexandra's the only one with the camera off. So anybody have a question? Let's start there. Is that Kara? Was that you? No.
I do see a question about what activities you have available for teens. And that is a great question. So we do have, last year we had our first ever teen camp. So we have an active group of teens that I'm trying to get engaged here virtually. We have not thus far. We had a couple of teen social events last month that we didn't have the best turnout for. But that is something that as time moves on, I'm actually going to be virtually hosting a teen town hall meeting to hopefully hear from some teens how they like to be engaged with the Clubhouse. Because if I just put things on the calendar that I think will be fun, I'm not a teenager, so I really need to hear from them what they'd like. So that is a group that we're going to be focusing on here for the fall. So if you have any specific ideas from your teen or anything they'd be interested in, please let me know, because that's definitely a group that we're looking to start, more of like a social group for teens. So, and I of course am here one-on-one for teen support as well, emotionally. So that's a great question.
Abby, I don't know if you're familiar with this, and it was a while ago, I had seen someone developed a video game about killing cancer, and it was sort of geared at like late area. I don't know if it's still out, or I don't know much about it. I didn't really pursue it, but I can look into it and see if there's something still out there.
Yeah, that would be great. I did not hear about that.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
It could be perfect for some teens.
Does anybody else have a question?
You can also email me or call me at any point. or if there's something you want me to expand on. There's just so much information that we kind of just skim the surface. So if there's anything you'd want more information on or resources on, I'm here. So I'd be happy to send that or talk with you more at any point.
Well, I have 3 sons. They're older now. They're 20. But what, like, do you have, and I know, like, just boys in general, like sometimes, it just seems like girls are more willing to talk and more willing to themselves. And like, do you have any just, and I know you gave a lot of examples, but anything specifically, any just general advice for boys?
Yeah. So definitely boys are more into, from what I found, working virtually even, are really into the physical. So I try to get them to do physical things. So we've made targets before, where we just take a piece of paper, and if they have like a water gun at home or a Nerf gun or any sort of ball, even we've used crumpled up pieces of paper to throw. So one activity I've done with them is making a target, and they can identify the different rings of what they're targeting. Again, they assign their own meaning to it. It could be cancer related, it could be grief and loss, it can be anger about not going back to school, whatever it is, and they physically try to hit those things. We have done water balloons with that too when we're at the clubhouse. That's another kind of cathartic way to get some energy out. And some passion out. But for the most part, we've had really good success with books. I mean, honestly, books and activities that go along with them. So it certainly depends on the age of the child. But it's nice to kind of just make it as play-based and active-based as possible. It shouldn't feel like work to them. It shouldn't feel like uncomfortable to them. It should just feel like play. That's kind of when it's working, is when it just feels natural. And so any of those cathartic activities like the target, what we've also done before I've done with school age boys is we'll use salt and chalk and rub different colors of chalk on the salt, and they kind of make their own salt art, like you make sand art, and they assign different feelings and emotions to the different salt colors. So salt and chalk are just 2 common things that are easily attainable right now. And so again, anything that physically kids can do, and same goes for girls, anything to kind of physically connect those emotions to an activity, I've found at least work pretty well.
What about sleep disturbances, or like, do you have any thoughts specifically on that, or?
So I think for sleep disturbances, if kids are having a hard time falling asleep or having a hard time staying asleep, it's important to identify as best you can why those disturbances are happening. So if your child is at an age where they are verbal and they do have the cognitive understanding of emotions, it's always good to open with open-ended questions, so that aren't blame kind of provoking. So I always kind of suggest the phrase, "I noticed that," to start off a conversation. "I noticed that you are waking up in the middle of the night. I hear you walking around." Or because a lot of times kids can't identify for themselves that might be a problem, or that might mean that they're processing or having a difficult emotion about something. So I'd kind of start with bringing awareness to it and figure out if you can come up with a plan based off of how that child learns and copes that works for them. So whether it's, I know for teenagers to begin with, sleep is a challenge. It's a hard thing because their sleep patterns are changing naturally as they get older. And so kind of figuring out where that's coming from and coming up with a different bedtime routine, or when you wake up at night, what are the things that you're thinking about? Do they come in to the parents' room in the middle of the night and want to sleep with them? So what are the actual changes that are happening? And they're showing you and telling you, and then just coming up with a solution that might work for them. A lot of times it is routine based, and a lot of the fears and anxieties come out at nighttime naturally as humans. That's when you start to think about everything right before bed. And if you wake up and think about them too, that can be hard as well. So it's good to kind of do some assessment there to normalize it, and then depending on what that is, come up with a routine.
I am going to